tonight I'm happy to introduce someone who's been here for several years with us. One of our directors will speak to us tonight, Bobbie Perkins, Charity Places.
Thank you, Cornell. So hello, everyone. Glad to see you all here in person and people online. I am going to get some notes. Kind of still meditating. My mind is still thinking, meditating. Okay. I want to begin by saying that I am not a scholar of world religions. I just speak from my own experience, observations, and a little bit of research with the help of Google. So, what I do know is that all over the world, people are observing many different spiritual traditions during this season of the year. And here in the States, we probably all have friends who are maybe observing Jewish holiday of Passover, or Muslim friends who are observing Ramadan, or Christian friends who have been already observing Lent and Good Friday and leading up to today, Easter. There are just a myriad of spiritual traditions that celebrate the coming of spring and kind of the turning of the year to a different season. In my introduction to this talk, the message that went out to everyone, I don't think everybody reads it, but anyway, I quoted Brother ChiSing. He gave a talk on August the 14th, 2011, and you can actually watch the entire talk on YouTube. So he said that the practice of one's beliefs is like observing the light through a different lampshade. And this is a quote from that. Show you the book. It's from this book, 108 Reflections. He said, some people prefer a Buddhist lampshade, a Christian lampshade, a Jewish lampshade, or a nonreligious lampshade, yet it is all one light. Celebrate the diversity, but know that beyond the diversity is the one infinite light that unites and unifies us all. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the traditions, certainly not all of them, because I think that would be quite a long Dharma talk. But let's talk first about the Jewish Passover. This event, this celebration, this commemoration occurs April the 5th through the 13th. This is a celebration and commemoration of the freedom of the Jews from Egyptian slavery. I don't know if you remember that story in the Old Testament, but Moses asked the Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go from their bondage, and the Pharaoh refused. And so God brought down a number of plagues. And the last plague was the elimination of the firstborn of the people in Egypt. And then the Jews were instructed to mark their doors so that they would be passed over. I think the emphasis, and I don't know because I'm not Jewish, but I think the emphasis is the fact that they were protected and that they were released from their bondage. So to me, if I was observing Passover, I think those would be two very important things to remember, that we are all protected and that we can be free from whatever binds us. During this time, there's quite a bit of food and habits of ways of doing things, very traditional. I read that this is also a time for them to give thanks, to forgive old grievances, and to really clean house in preparation for Passover. So that's kind of what I learned about Jewish Passover. But the important thing is, to me, that they recognized that they were safe and they were following their practices. The next one I read about is Ramadan, which occurs from March the 23rd to April the 21st. And this is a celebration and a commemoration of the first verses of the Quran that were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad more than 1,400 years ago. In this tradition, some people, the people who I read, the people who are able-bodied and able and willing to take up the challenge, fast from sunrise to sunset. And fasting in this tradition means really fasting, no food, no drink. They refrain from any kind of movement, exercise. It's just really fasting. And the aim is to achieve a greater consciousness of Allah or God. So they practice patience, self-control, discipline. And then Ramadan ends with a feast to break the fast, and they invite friends and family to attend. In fact, one of the members of the Richardson Interfaith Alliance, a Muslim community, is hosting this kind of feast. I think it's called a fitr. Not sure how to say it. But we've all been invited, and if you're interested, I can give you the information. You can send them your RSVP and attend a local celebration of the end of Ramadan. So then I moved on to the Hindu traditions. And this one, I have more information than I want to share with you or read to you. You can just Google it yourself. But there are so many festivals in India and in the Hindu tradition. One of the largest is the one called Holi. And this is the one where people throw colors, powder colors to everybody that's there. And it symbolizes no distinction, everybody's included. It doesn't matter who's there, everybody's participating. This tradition is linked to the origin of Bolivara, which is messages. There are messages of goodness, renewal, and love, and they're always the same. So sometimes people pay off old debts and renew broken relationships, make new friends in the spirit of Holy, which encourages harmony and new beginnings. And then if you follow on reading about this, you'll discover that there is pretty much a holiday every month. I do want to mention this one. There's a festival that celebrates Lord Brahma, who created the universe in Ugadi. I mention that because in the Buddhist tradition, we say the Brahma Viharas every Sunday. We sing that, we chant that. The Brahma Viharas came about because a man who was a Brahma, that sect in India, came to the Buddha and asked him how he could be sure that he would enter the kingdom. I'm not sure how I've forgotten what he called it, but to always be with the spiritual, on the spiritual path. And the Buddha told him the four Brahma Viharas. These are the things that will help you to always be in touch with the spiritual path. But then there are others. There's one going on right now, or soon, April 13th and 14th, and so on. So most of these have something to do with the various gods, the various like Ganesh and Hanuman and those kinds of deities. So then let's talk about Easter as it's observed by Christians. These observations differ quite a bit, actually, depending on the religious denomination. Some traditions are the same. Almost everybody celebrates some observance of Good Friday and obviously Easter Sunday. Good Friday is the day that Jesus was crucified, which always made me wonder, why is it called Good Friday? I had to make something up, so I decided it was Good Friday because of the sacrifice that Jesus made in the Christian tradition. So people will be saved because he sacrificed himself. So I'm thinking that must be what it means that it was a Good Friday. Anyway, Easter is his resurrection from the dead. And so some Christian traditions celebrate Lent. Lent began on, I don't have that written down. It was 40 days ago, whenever that was. And it moves through different periods. Different people who observe it follow different traditions depending on what part of Lent it is. But one of the things that's pretty consistent is that there is also fasting. It's not quite as strict, I think, as the Muslims observe, but they fast, giving up something, some particular food, a habit, a grudge, and also determined to, again, bring in more light, to be more loving, to renew their practice. Another thing that was new to me, several years ago I learned about this, but in my Baptist upbringing, we never observed something called the Stations of the Cross during the week that's called Holy Week, which is just the week that just had April 2nd to the 9th. And what they, I don't know, are any of you familiar with that? No?
All of us Catholics should be.
Yeah, it's kind of an Anglican and Catholic tradition. And several years ago, I was part of a labyrinth group in the Episcopal Church, the Transfiguration. And they observe the Stations of the Cross. They have a whole thing about it. And for some reason, because I like to draw mandalas, a person who was kind of in charge of that ceremony asked me if I would create new pictures for their little booklet about the Stations of the Cross. And so I thought, I just answered too quickly. I said, sure, I'll do that. I had no idea what the Stations of the Cross were. I had no idea exactly what I was going to be asked to do or what kind of pictures they wanted. They wanted mandalas, which I do that. But then I found out what it was. And I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do about that? Because it's all about the things that happened in that week called Holy Week, the things that happened as Jesus was moving toward the crucifixion. And the first station is, I should say, most churches have either pictures or stained glass windows that have these stations of the cross. And when they do this observance, they move from one to the other and sort of tell the story. So the first station is Jesus is condemned to death. And so in an Episcopal church, I'm not going to read all this to you, obviously, but this is what they read when they're going and observing that particular picture. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests with the leaders and scribes and the whole council held a consultation, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him to Pilate. And they all condemned him and said, he deserves to die. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Then he handed Jesus over to be crucified. So that's the first station. And then there's 7 more. Actually there's 14. That tells you what I know. Cornell, do you remember that?
Yes. We did it every week during Lent, all of my years of Catholic school.
Yeah. So the 14th station, the last one, is when Jesus is laid in the tomb. So then Easter Sunday is celebration of the resurrection. Anyway, so now I had to figure out, what image do I use for Jesus? They didn't want anything that was like pictorial exactly. They didn't want me to try to draw a picture of a person. And I really had to think about that and meditate about it. And what I finally came up with was a flame, a light, which makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. I didn't know what else to do, so I drew a light, a flame. And I'll just show you this is the picture. Well, this one is on the cover, and this is the second station where Jesus takes up his cross. So you can see the light and bound by, so show people that. So in all of the pictures, there is this flame, the light. So that's what Lent is all about, mostly. The Stations of the Cross is the last piece. So now I come to Buddhism. And I just thought probably that during Buddha Shakyamuni's lifetime, which was mostly spent in India, or was all spent in India, most of the people that he came across, and most of the people that he told, I want to say preached to, but that's because I'm still thinking in Christian terms. But anyway, most of them celebrated Hindu holidays and observances. And I still notice there's a really strong connection between Buddhism and between Buddhists and Hindus. We practice very much the same kind of meditation, yoga. There are particular burial rituals, and there's definitely a strong reverence for earth. In India, the Ganges River is practically a deity. And most rivers are very, very much revered in India. So in May, in just a few weeks, Buddhists will celebrate the birth, death, and nirvana of Buddha Shakyamuni. And in this community, we will commemorate that on May 28th with a special Sunday service. Our Buddhist friends at the International Buddhist Progress Society, just down the street on Arapahoe, always have a wonderful celebration that includes bathing the baby Buddha. Yeah, I'm still very much Christian, I guess. Anyway, they bathe the baby Buddha. They have really pretty drawings, pictures, paintings of different scenes in the Buddha's life, and it's followed by a service with chanting, meditation, and a talk. I wanted to read to you a poem as I'm talking about Buddha. This poem is called Buddha's Last Instruction. I bet some of you know what he said. Make of yourself a light, said the Buddha before he died. And the poet says, I think of this every morning as the east begins to tear off its thin clouds of darkness to send up the first signal, a white fan streaked with pink and violet, even green. An old man, he lay down between two solid trees, and he might have said anything, knowing it was his final hour. The light burns upward, it thickens and settles over the fields. Around him, the villagers gathered and stretched forward to listen. Even before the sun itself hangs disattached in the blue air, I am touched everywhere by its ocean of yellow waves. No doubt he thought of everything that had happened in his difficult life. And then I feel the sun itself as it blazes over the hills like a million flowers on fire. Clearly, I'm not needed, yet I feel myself turning into something inexplicably valued. Slowly beneath the branches, he raised his head. He looked into the faces of that frightened crowd. And then I would circle back to the first part, make of yourself a light, said the Buddha. I put this picture here for all of us to see. This is Thich Nhat Hanh. Whoa, please. This is tricky. All right. This is Thich Nhat Hanh in the lamp transmission ceremony. In this tradition, Dharma teachers go through a ceremony called the lamp transmission. And during that lamp transmission, each Dharma teacher is given this kind of lamp. It's lit by the presiding monk, which used to be Thich Nhat Hanh, and then the recipient offers some kind of gift, a poem, a story, a song, a picture, and then they receive the lamp transmission. So we are, even though you and I have not been ordained into the lamp transmission, we are still, I would say, tasked with spreading the light and being the light, being the lamp, being the light. It all comes back to that light. So in my message that went out on Friday, I think, I called it Bunnies, Baskets, and Bonnets. So we see that during this season. What does that have to do with Easter? Actually, it kind of fits right in. The Easter Bunny, for instance, seems to have been brought to the United States by German immigrants that first settled in Pennsylvania. In Germany, the bunny was a hare, H-A-R-E, hare. So the Easter hare became the Easter bunny in the United States. Rabbits and hares are prolific baby makers, so they came to represent new birth, a fresh start, vitality. In the German tradition, children would make a nest with the branches and leaves from trees so that the Easter hare would have a place to leave treats for them. And the nest then, of course, became a basket in the United States. And filling the basket has become a big business, as you might imagine. But this has to do with sharing, with acknowledging this fresh start, vitality, and if you were fasting for Lent, this is a perfect way to break that fast. Bonnets, another tradition that grew out of a desire to celebrate spring with new clothes. When I was young, in every Easter, we had a new outfit to go to Sunday service. New shoes, new clothes. We didn't wear hats, but it was a tradition, and everybody followed it. Some people had much fancier new clothes than I did, but it didn't matter because it was new. So bonnets grew out of that tradition, and there still is, believe it or not, something called the Easter Parade in New York City. It started back in the 30s when people would leave the church. After church, they would leave church and just parade down Fifth Avenue in their new finery. And you may have heard of, there's a song called Easter Parade. Irving Berlin wrote that. And then they actually made a movie called Easter Parade in the late 40s. So many of these traditions stem from pagan rituals and celebrations that welcomed the spring season. So shedding the cold, the challenging winter, and joyfully inviting new growth, letting go of the old. Do any of you remember that song from, oh my goodness, the Merry Month of May? No? It's from Camelot, so you have to be at that age, I guess. It's May, the merry month of May. And anyway, they're jubilant when they practice it. So early Christians purposefully planned their celebration to coincide with pagan rituals so that they could avoid persecution, because in those early days, it was kind of dangerous to be a Christian. But I think that probably since those same rituals and celebrations were already familiar to the new Christians, they continued to include them, like celebrating with sharing eggs, for instance. That was another part of this kind of celebration. So, summing up, welcoming and celebrating spring is universal, and the common denominator is celebrating renewal, rebirth, spiritual growth, and joy. The celebrations vary a lot because they reflect the many different views that are in our world. But they're all a celebration of the light, the return of the light, the renewal of the light, a reminder that light is ever present. I'm going to finish with the end of the ChiSing's talk. Or rather, maybe it is the end of the talk, but it's the end of this excerpt. He said, so celebrate your particular lampshade, enjoy it, love it, embrace it, and share it. Just remember, we are all manifestations of the truth, all of us. The truth is always about infinite light, infinite love, infinite life. Thank you.